Yeah, we were talking about this morning about systems of government in the various forms that we know, and how it's not actually applied rigidly in the way we classically understand it, like communism.
I don't know what the point is in the labels. I don't know what the point is of any definitions of any political systems, because none of them exist on Earth, in any society. Any theory, any political theory doesn't exist anywhere in society. So I don't know what the point is, except to actually obfuscate what your real existing system is. To define your system as a democracy, or to define your system as communist, or to define your system as socialist, or to define your system as capitalist, or whatever the case may be. Whether you're talking about a political theory or an economic theory, none of them exist in reality.
Yeah.
And no one seems to want to talk about what the real existing systems are.
Okay. So what would be the real existing system?
Any power structure that exists in any society, in any given society, usually is coming from historically existing. It's a
Continuum.
yeah, it's a continuation of whatever existed before, whatever just sort of organically was created in the society, and then it just takes different.
Forms.
It's sort of tweaked over time, and then you apply a definition. This is what the West has done. Then they apply a definition to it and say it's this form of government, or this form of economic system, or what have you. When it's not. The theory that you're calling it isn't what it is. The theory, like America is not a democracy. America is not capitalist. China is not communist. None of these things apply, because you're not addressing what the real existing power structure is in your society. You're insisting on attributing a particular definition, or a particular label, or a particular category to define what your power structure is.
Yeah.
And at this point, all that does is serve to obfuscate what the real power structure is. Because you're making people continuously think that it's, for example, that America is a democratic system.
Right.
As if the government is the main power over people's lives in America, not the private sector. You know? And the same we were talking about with Kerala. Kerala is ruled by the so-called Communist Party. But it's not a communist government. You have private ownership, you have private property, you don't have public ownership of the means of production, or communal ownership of the means of production. That doesn't exist. That doesn't exist anywhere. In any country that calls itself communist, that doesn't exist. Meaning, the theory is inapplicable in real life, just as the democracy is inapplicable in real life. Even if it could be applied, it's not a good idea. Because it's just too many things are required for it to even be workable. The requirements for a functional democracy to be effective and actually serving the interests of the people, serving the real interests of the people, the requirements upon the society itself, upon the population itself, is too strenuous for that to exist in anything larger than a village. There's no way that can exist in a whole country of 300 million people. Impossible. Because the level of knowledge and understanding and comprehension of politics, of economics, of everything that you need everyone to have, if everyone is going to have a say in what policy is going to be and who's going to be there. This is completely unrealistic. This is delusional. This is really a utopian, delusional thing that can only maybe exist, like I said, in a village somewhere. You know, if then. But the reality is that every none of us just got here on Earth. We all come from a history, and there's been power structures in society ever since there's been people. There have been some people who rose above others. There's been ranks. There's hierarchies in human society always. This is a permanent condition in human society. For us, especially for Muslims, but for everyone in the global South, especially all of the formerly colonized countries, currently neo-colonized countries, most of them, you have to reject all of these definitions, reject all of these categories, reject all of these labels, because I believe that they were always intended to obfuscate the reality of the power structure, so that they can say, no, you can't accuse us of this, that, and the other, because we're a democracy.
Right. It's either that, or they can use it against us and say that you're not applying democratic principles.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
or what have you.
Right,
you
right,
know,
right.
Because you are insisting on applying a label that has no realistic dimension in its application.
Yeah.
So you're trying to, again, like you said, to obfuscate, and not only that, there's a kind of an obsession with labeling.
There's an obsession with labeling,
Yeah,
absolutely, categorizing,
it
labeling.
just informs me that you're not interested to actually understand the dynamics within a society that's foreign to you. So you need to just put a category to it.
Oh, I think it's even deeper than that. I think it comes from a general feeling of being overwhelmed by what you think is the chaos of life. Really, I think that's what it is.
They can't
So,
cope.
so yeah, so that we need to compartmentalize and we need to set borders on everything.
Right.
They're obsessed with this whole concept, with this whole approach, with this whole habit of setting borders on things, setting definitions to things, categorizing things, calling things certain,
Yeah,
labels,
boxing it in.
boxing things. Yeah, we need to box reality into a bunch of different categories, and that's the only way that we can cope.
And the most rigid people are calling the rest of the world, like claiming that the rest of the world lacks freedom.
Right, exactly.
You
And,
know?
and you're obsessed with
It's sad
categorizing
and
and,
rigid.
and bordering and labeling and,
Yeah.
and restricting and defining everything.
Uh-huh.
I mean, yeah, it's really absurd. And so there's no reason for especially again for Muslims and for anyone in the global south to bother with this.
Yeah.
There's no
Really.
reason why you need to say, well, we're communist or we're socialist or we're democratic or we're capitalist or we're liberal or we're conservative. We have nothing to do with all of this. All of this is coming from people who are very deeply, profoundly, inherently confused about life. And so the only way they can make life make any sense to them is with all of these categories and labels and
That
definitions,
yeah.
none of which are real. It becomes ridiculous. It really becomes ridiculous when someone says, like, for example, well, I'm a democratic, socialist, libertarian, socially conservative, privately liberal. Da, da, da. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And this is why I was talking about, like I wish that actually in a state like Kerala, where I think it's a very interesting state, I wish that you didn't feel the need to call yourself communist. Not because I have any problem with this in and of itself, but obviously you're not. You're not by orthodox communism, you're not. By the theory, communist theory, whatever, you're not. You have capitalism, you have private ownership, you have private property, you have elites. It's not an egalitarian society. You have the rich, you have the poor. These are all things that exist in your society, which is not a communist society.
Yeah. And
What it means, what it comes down to meaning is that we are a government that prioritizes as much as we can the actual interests of the people. And we try to be as fair as possible in terms of class issues, in terms of class discrimination or class privilege versus disadvantage.
correct. Like previously, you had the feudal system. You resisted that, and for the lack of a better word, you dismantled the system, and you came up with a system that represents the interests of the people. And so you formed a hybrid form of governance. It's not an exclusively,
Absolutely.
you know,
And this is the thing. Every government is a hybrid government. Every government is. Because America couldn't be more socialist. America couldn't be more socialist than it is, except that it's in terms of corporations. You're incredibly socialist in terms of corporations.
in terms of what bailing them out.
The government has subsidized it and has enabled it and has created these corporations, you know, and they get everything they want. It's their absolute it's a corporate welfare system in America. So you believe in welfare, absolutely, but for the rich. Which, okay, that's your system. You can
Yeah.
that's what you've decided to do because that's consistent with your history. That's what I'm saying. Every actual existing power structure in the world has some. It's an offshoot of their history. It's a continuation to one degree or another of their history. And it's funny, like in Kerala, and not just Kerala, but throughout the global South, people became communist or were labeled as communist. Either they labeled themselves as communist or they were labeled as communist by the West, and that was in and of itself an indictment against you,
Yeah.
against the West, because actually what we're talking about is people who care about their people and who care about their own control over their own resources, and they care about not being exploited and not being colonized and not being the subjects of imperialism. So You created a bipolar world where there's only two options, either capitalism or communism.
Yeah.
So capitalism means subjugation. That's what it means to these people in the global south. You defined it for us that way.
Yeah.
Because of your behavior. From what we see,
Yeah.
capitalism means slavery.
Right.
It means subjugation. It means imperialism. It means colonization. It means the rape and pillage of our resources. It means our political subjugation. That's what capitalism means as far as we know.
No.
And you've told us that the only other alternative is communism.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll take that then. We'll take that. Even though in reality, that's not at all what you have. And that's not even what you're advocating in reality. So it's hybrid. But like I said, all of them are hybrid because none of these philosophies, none of these theories can exist in the real world. So what's the point?
These theories cannot exist and applied in its isolation, in its rigid form, in the real world. It doesn't work. And like I said earlier, like every country, every state functions, in its own peculiar culture, and it's influenced by the pull of the geopolitics surrounding it, and it's
In the history.
yeah, and it varies from region to region. So you can't just apply, even for the sake of simplicity, you can't just apply a label and you think you have understood it, or you can approach to even politically engage with it with your fake labels.
Absolutely. The labels become obstacles.
Yeah.
The labels prevent you from actually doing anything properly because you think that you have to subscribe to this theory and then therefore whatever that theory requires. When actually every society, this is how it really works. Every society has hierarchy. This is a reality in human society, always will be, always has been, always will be. That some rise above others, some are richer than others, some are more powerful than others, some have more influence than others, and so forth. And Allah has already told us that that's how human society is organized. So the struggle is always to try to ensure that those at the top of the hierarchy, those with the most power, the ruling class, or what have you, don't exclusively serve their own interests to the detriment of the rest of the population. So every political theory that's come down the pipe has said that they have a way of doing that, of ensuring that the interests of the society will be part of the scenario. It will be considered, and those in power won't be exclusively self-serving. Communism said that, socialism says that, democracy says that, even capitalism has their version of that. That it's good for the market and everyone rises, all boats rise on all of this.
Trickle down effect.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Everybody has this. But at the end of the day, every single society, every individual society, even on a micro level, every society has to find their own way of how to interface with the power structure to ensure that their people, that the population is included in planning, is included in policy, so that they're not overlooked and they're not left disadvantaged, and that the power structure isn't exclusively self-serving. Everyone has to come up with their way of doing that. So we're not in favor of overthrowing any power structure, no matter what form it is. We're not pro or against any power structure, but we're just realistic in insisting that you correctly identify what the power structure is in this or that society, who really holds power, what kind of power they hold, how much impact and influence they have over society, and then you have to figure out ways of interfacing with them to ensure that they are not exclusively self-serving. It's unrealistic, it's delusional, and it's very counterproductive, actually, to try to insist on one particular form of engagement with the power structure.
Yeah.
And saying that one particular form of government solves all of these problems. It doesn't. It doesn't at all. Everyone has to come up with their own way.
It keeps you distracted. You're always being on the defensive, or you try to work around the rigidity of that box that you put yourself into. And it really takes out the creative process in finding a solution.
Especially in America, when you're saying the solution is democracy and voting, when that's removed from the power structure entirely.
Yeah.
And you don't even want us to look at that. You don't want us to look at BlackRock. You don't want us to look at Larry Fink. Larry Fink has more power than the President of the United States. Larry Fink has more power than the President of the United States. You're telling me to vote and that solves my problem? What about Larry Fink? What about the oligarchs? You're pretending that you don't have oligarchs because you don't call them that?
Yeah.
Because this is what I mean. This is where the
The-
labels and the definitions become just for the purpose of deflection,
Yeah.
just for the purpose of covering up what the reality is. You never want to talk about what the real power structure is because you insist that I call you a democracy. But
And you post that virtue because you attribute virtue to being a democracy, and so surely there shouldn't be anything wrong. If there's something wrong, then it's something wrong with you. You're just not working hard enough, or you're just not trying to find the opportunity, or what have
yeah,
you.
and you can say, like for example, like I don't know, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and I mean I hate to always mention those ones, but in those countries, the government is responsive to the population, to the actual citizenry.
Yeah.
The government is responsive to the citizenry. They have their means, they have their channels, they have their system. It's not a democracy,
Contrary
but the government is much more responsive because you have this old, existing, pre-existing authority structure embedded in the society, embedded in the civilization throughout history.
yeah, there's a decorum between the ruled and the rulers. And if you cannot recognize that, you would call it a monarchy, dictatorship, authoritarian,
despot.
yeah, yeah, despot, and what have you. It's one of two things. You are either not interested in actually identifying the reality or the nature of the system, or you just want to again cover up.
Yeah,
and
that's
just-
that's what it is.
Yeah.
In my view, because they're obsessed with. I mean, you can't actually separate, even though they think that they're being very intelligent with this organizing habit of labeling and defining and categorizing. They think that that's a very intelligent way because they're organizing everything. Because again, they're terrified that the world is just chaos.
Okay.
I think that they're terrified, and you can see like a Jordan Peterson, Mr. Western supremacist. He's obsessed with the idea of chaos. He's haunted by the idea of chaos, and to him, the opposite of chaos is rules,
Uh-huh. I see. Okay.
not morality,
I see
for
where this
example.
is going. Okay.
But in doing that, you are unavoidably simplifying. You need everything to be simplified. Because you can't categorize something without simplifying it. There's no way that you can stick a label on something except that you have completely simplified it.
Yeah.
And you've slapped that label on top of all possible nuance,
Yeah. You make it very simplistic.
all intricacy. Yeah, you've
You
made it
make
very
it very
simplistic.
simplistic, and it's different from being simple.
Yeah,
you
well,
know?
okay, no,
Yeah.
yeah, but simplistic.
Yeah.
And in simplifying, you're losing the meaning, actually. You know, you simplify to the point of deception. You're simplifying to the point of deception, that you're not telling the truth. You're not telling the truth about your society
Yeah.
in America. You are not telling the truth to yourselves and to everyone else. And you're also not telling the truth about us to yourselves, you know? But we at least we should know better than to listen to that.
Yeah.
But we were talking about the fact that these and this is why you see some of the societies like even in Malaysia and what have you, especially in the Muslim countries, how quickly they've really bounced back from colonialism.
Yeah.
How quickly they really bounce back. Because their inherent embedded authority structures were never broken down. They remained. That's how they survived even colonialism. That's how they survived imperialism. Even if they went through periods of being corrupted or being compromised because of elites collaborating with colonizers, what have you. The point is, the value of that authority structure never was diminished.
Yeah.
So has continued, you know.
Yeah, there's a high regard for all of the. I mean, you can call it ceremonial or whatever it is. There's a formality again, between the rulers and the ruled. They appreciate and understand the structure, and they have no interest in discarding it because again, it creates a form of decorum in the society.
Those old cultures, the old ancient actual civilizations, meaning that they were civilized, are now rising. In some ways, I mean, alhamdulillah for everything, but in some ways, I really wish that I was from the young generation. Because wallahi, you're going to live in a much better world than I've lived in for 50 years. That for most of my 50 years was unimaginable. Because the adults are going to be taking over control from the adolescents. Because the adults are the ancient civilizations, the Muslim civilization, Asian civilizations, African civilizations, the global south. They will have authority globally. And they have a completely different way of approaching the world. Just the same way that a grown adult person has a different way of approaching the world than an adolescent, than a teenager who doesn't know what they're doing and who has something to prove. You know, that's how the West is acted, because you never were supposed to be in the driver's seat, and because you don't know how to drive.
You just
And
going
you
with
have
the
no idea
motion.
what you're doing. You have no idea what you're doing. You're going through the motions of driving. You go through the motions of leadership, and it's the view of leadership of really a child. It's
Yeah.
the view of authority of a child. It's the view of power of a child. And the actual authority is shifting, alhamdulillah, back to the ancient civilizations.
I mean, you had a moment there where you had leadership that was of some consequence, of brutal consequence, where it made colonialism possible and everything else that followed possible.
Well, that's what I mean. You have the view of power and leadership of an adolescent, which is to be a bully, which is just force, violence. Not you haven't as an adolescent, as a teenager, as a child, you haven't grasped the concept of earning respect, of actually earning respect. Everyone in the West talks about respect. They talk about it, but they don't give any regard to being a respectable person.
Of being qualified to be a recipient
Yeah.
of respect. Yeah.
Yeah. And alhamdulillah, we're living in a transition. We're living in a period of transition that from the majority of my lifetime seemed impossible. I can honestly say this is the first time in my life, in half a century of living, when I can genuinely, truly, legitimately, honestly say that I'm hopeful about the future. And there's no reason not to be hopeful and optimistic about the future, because control of the planet is being given back to the grown-ups.
Alhamdulillah. For that.
Alhamdulillah.